Obviously, this truly is a hot topic because we have a great turnout tonight. We actually had a big waiting list as well, so it's obvious how important this is in our community. I'm Pat Dorsey. I'm the publisher of the Herald-Tribune, and welcome to tonight's Herald-Tribune Hot Topics. So thanks to everyone for coming out. We really have a great program. Tom Tryon will be out in just a second to introduce everyone. But let me first give a special thanks to Joe McKenna and the Sarasota Orchestra team for hosting us in this great venue. So thanks very much to them. But with that, go ahead. We can clap for them. That's great. So without further ado, let me turn the program over to Tom Tryon. He's our opinion editor and tonight's moderator, and he will introduce all of the panelists. So take it away, Tom. Thank you.
Wow, nice crowd, huh? Hello, everybody. So my first question always is, can you hear me okay? Good, thank you. So the little housekeeping business first. Let's actually, everybody do this. Little check here. Actually, I should probably check mine, too. All right. I will note that METV, Manatee Educational TV, is recording this event tonight. So I want to thank Charles Clapsaddle and his staff for doing this. They're the hardest working folks in television, I'd like to tell them. This event will air on METV and on its YouTube channel subsequent to tonight. We'll also take comments and questions after the event at the HT Hot Topics Facebook page. That's HT Hot Topics on Facebook. Okay, so there are four main reasons, I think, that there's such a large audience here today. One is we have a caring community. Two is that mental health is an important and serious challenge, as we all know. Three, we have a compelling panel. And four, the Herald-Tribune has produced excellent journalism on this topic, ranging from a series on conditions in state mental hospitals to a series on schizophrenia. And I can say that because I had absolutely nothing to do with any of that. But Carrie did, and so did our executive editor, Bill Church, who's in the house. So thank you, Bill. So the author of the series on schizophrenia, Carrie Seidman, is with us tonight. And we're going to begin with a brief conversation with her about the series and its origin. Without further ado, please welcome Carrie Seidman. Sounds like you have a fan club.
I hope so. I paid them all a lot of money to be here.
So, let's start with this. The series in question started with the title, The S Word. Tell us a little bit about that title.
Well, for those of you who read the series, you know that I have a son who has a mental illness. And I think for any parent of a child with a mental illness, it's been a rough road when every time you pick up the paper, the only time you hear about mental illness is when someone has done something really horrible and tragic. And yet we don't talk about the vast majority of other people with the illness who are not dangerous and who are often victimized themselves. And I felt like, especially the word schizophrenia, it's like, I remember at one point my son, who is diagnosed as schizoaffective, told me it would be all right to tell people he was bipolar, but because several Hollywood people had admitted that they struggled with bipolar, but that I couldn't say that he had schizophrenia because that was a whole different level. So the S Word title came about because of the weighted meaning that comes with schizophrenia. My idea in doing this story was not just to share my story and the story of another gentleman, Patrick O'Keefe, but to write about mental illness from a different perspective than what you usually see in newspaper reports, and to humanize both the illness and the people and families who struggle with it. And on another level, I also wanted to show what can happen when people with the illness get proper treatment and a continuum of care and the right support, how they can recover and lead successful, contributive lives. So that was my impetus, and that was the meaning behind the name of the series.
Right. So what did you learn in reporting on that series and gathering information and presenting it?
Well, I probably learned more about mental illness just going through the process with my son than anything I learned about mental illness after the series came out. What I mostly learned was how many, many, many people and families have been touched by this, and how if you open the door on the subject in a way that's open and honest, how many people said to me, you know, my sister has schizophrenia, my uncle has schizophrenia, my mom had schizophrenia. It's in everyone's family if you look back far enough. So I think what I learned was just how widespread how many families it's touched, and how people really do want to talk about it. After the S word came out, we held a little community conversation over at the paper, and we didn't take reservations, and we didn't really know how many people we'd expect, and we thought maybe 50 or something. And when we got past 100 and people were standing out in the hall, I was like, oh my gosh, this is really touching a nerve with a lot of people. And I think the same thing across the country. It seems to be an issue that's really gaining momentum as something that people want to talk about and have addressed in a better way.
Okay, thanks. I'll ask the other panelists this question, but since we're here, I'll ask you now. And it's kind of my magic wand question. And that is, so if you had a magic wand and you could make something happen, even without worrying about the money or the policy or whatever, what would you do? So I'm going to ask you that in two ways. One, if you would have had a magic wand during your experience with your son, other than making it all go away.
That would have been, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I'm sitting here asking the question, okay, what would she have asked for? Let's see. But if you would have been able to fix something, change something, what would you have done? What would you have wanted to have changed?
I'm not a policymaker. I'm a journalist and a mother. I can't profess to have answers to how to fix all the systems that are broken in terms of mental health. The one thing that I would have wanted to change as a mother is how people treated my son when they knew he was ill. You know, he's not a pariah. He's a wonderful, generous, kind person, and someone who has a lot to give this world. And I wish everyone who had a mental illness could be respected and understood and be treated with sympathy and support.
And where are you today in that experience?
Writing this series has been really wonderful for me. I've heard from so many of you who have been supportive, and my son did participate in, I did the writing, but he participated in the project and was at the last conversation, and I think it was a really, really positive experience for both of us just to see people talking about it and concerned and wanting to help. So I feel really good about the momentum that's building over this issue, not just locally, but nationally. You heard President Obama in his gun control talk the other day also mention mental health and more funding for mental health. So I'm hoping things are kind of reaching a tipping point where we're actually going to not just shove this back under the carpet, but we're going to take some meaningful action.
Good, thank you. So this series is still in its digital form online at Herald-Tribune.com. I think it's under special projects. So if you haven't seen it, again, I had no role in it, but so I can say you ought to make sure you see it and read it. It's very compelling and informative as well. So thank you again, and thanks for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
All right. Now, so we'll move on to our panel. I'll do them alphabetically, and they can sit where they want to on the stage, although the man with the gun wants to sit on the far left, so the rest of y'all can do what you want. So it's the hallmark of this of these hot topics meetings is to be very brief on introductions. So that's what I'll do. And so first is Wayne Applebee, who has the longest title of anybody in the room, Sarasota County's Director of Homeless Services and Interim Human Services Manager. Wayne Applebee. Next is Tom Knight, the Sheriff of Sarasota County. Next is Dr. Parlane Reid, Psychiatrist of local note. And last but not least, of course, is Mary Ruiz, Chief Executive Officer, Centerstone of Florida. All right. So before we delve into the seriousness of the discussion, let's go left to right, starting with the sheriff. Where'd you graduate from college?
Florida State University.
How many years?
How many years did it take me?
Yeah,
How many years did it take me? I'm out. I made it out.
Yeah. All right, Wayne.
University of Maine.
Wow. Mary?
New College and University of South Florida.
Yeah.
University of California.
But tell us all of them.
Oh, what do you mean? No, University of California. I spent some time at Stanford, and then I got another degree at University of Connecticut. Had two careers, actually.
Yeah. Molecular I can't even say it.
Molecular biology I had a PhD from the University of California, and then later on I got my MD at University of Connecticut.
Yeah. I graduated with 122 credits on the nose, and that was it. I was out. And you, ma'am?
I graduated from Barnard College and Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism.
Wow, I'm in rare air here. Tom Tryon, University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. Saw my first snow there, actually. Okay, here we go. We'll go around the table, and we'll start with Mary. The simple question, why we're all here. From your perspective, what are the most important major mental health challenges in our community? This is a minute worth.
I think the major problem in Florida and also nationally is that we have a crisis system of care. It's not a system of health care. It's not a system of wellness. We wait until people are a danger to themselves or others before they get immediate access to care. We don't offer them early assessment and intervention so that they don't progress, treatment to maintain their lives. And so what other aspect of healthcare runs solely on crisis and being so sick that you have to be in a hospital? And I think that's our main problem.
Okay, thanks. Dr. Reid?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say, however, that a factor that influences that is the stigma of having a mental health problem. And I think that one of the things that's helping us move forward as we continue to investigate mental health difficulties, we find more and more of them have a medical problem as the core of the difficulty, that it's not psychological. And as we do that, I think we get more and more acceptance of the illnesses.
Okay, Sheriff Knight, from your perspective?
Well, ours, of course, is crisis. The deputies who work the streets of Sarasota County are typically the ones that come make the first contact with people who are chronic or who are in that crisis situation. And You know, it certainly is becoming more difficult with the lack of social services that we have available to us, but certainly the training that we give them now to give them opportunities rather than put handcuffs on people and arrest them, to give them tools to where we can take these individuals for treatment is the most important thing to us now. So but it is becoming much more of a crisis for law enforcement than it has been in my 29 years.
All right, and Wayne?
Well, going last, you know, I was going to also mention the idea of the focus of mental health services on crisis, and when that was said, I was going to go to stigma as well, because I think stigma at the 100,000 level is really sets the basis of how we make decisions across the system and policy. So since those were said, I'll add a third component, and that is, you know, really trying to attain true mental health parity with any other mental illness. Why do we treat folks who have an illness in the brain different than we do an illness of the heart? Now, some of that, of course, is, you know, because the illness of the brain has some behaviors that lead to, you know, the green uniforms involved, but we need to move from crisis and stigma in order to attain it at a parity level with all medical issues.
All right. And Mary and Dr. Reid, one of the things, actually beforehand, Carrie and I were talking about, at least I think in many minds, including mine often, when you say mental health challenges, you immediately think about crises. You think about people on the street or people who are ready to hurt themselves or acting very odd. But talk a little bit about, you know, from your perspective, you know, what is mental health? I mean, what does that encompass, and what are we not doing on the front end that perhaps we should be doing?
Yeah, clearly there is a large spectrum of what we call mental health issues. There are people who want to improve their lives, who think that they're held back by certain fears or ways they behave, and they need some therapy, and they want that, but they have jobs, they're healthy, they basically exercise, they're doing quite well. And then we have the crisis people at the other end of the spectrum. But there are a whole lot of people along that spectrum between more healthy and people who are sicker, and it's hard to devise a system that cares for all of them. Mary's going to tell us, I hope, about a system they're attempting where we don't throw either people on the sickest people all in the hospital and everybody else gets to see somebody in an office, but in fact we can provide other kinds of services. And I think that's what we'll end up having to do. We end up having to care for people along that whole spectrum.
What we've learned at Centerstone is that we're missing a level of care in our country. We have inpatient, we have outpatient. Crisis is something that doesn't have to be chronic. Crisis can be a time-limited thing when it receives the right supports and the right intensity. People can move on to being able to live their lives in recovery and benefit from the psychiatrist and the counselor and not be in crisis anymore. We've been using a model that we basically call a hospital without walls. It's 24/7, but the team is in the community with social supports and supports for medication. And we have found that within 6-8 months, most people can then benefit from traditional outpatient. So what we've learned is crisis is something that has been created by the lack of adequate mental health supports. And when you have those mental health supports, people can move out of crisis. And that's very hopeful.
Good, thanks. So, Mary, just for everybody's benefit, and I'm just going to say this once, that Centerstone, formerly known as Manatee Glens. But tell folks just very briefly, what is Centerstone now? What are you doing? What services do you offer?
Manatee Glens joined Centerstone in July. It is one of the largest nonprofit community mental health agencies in the country. We're in 4 states, Florida being one, Tennessee, Indiana, and Illinois. And we've all joined our missions together because we can do more with a larger footprint than we can as a small agency. And so we're benefiting from Centerstone writing federal grants, from doing our information technology, from helping us buy our benefits at a cheaper rate so that we can focus on services in the community. So we're very excited to be part of this group because we think it's going to mean better and more services for us here in the community.
And what kind of services specifically do you deliver?
Mental health and addictions, inpatient and outpatient, child and adult, and we also do child welfare, child abuse and neglect. And this is a mental health forum, but we all know that the heroin epidemic is taking a terrible toll in our community, and it's impacting the kids. We've removed twice as many kids from their homes this year than we did 2 years ago.
I'd like to point out, if I could, that in the early 1960s, the idea was to empty out state hospitals and provide funding to the community to take care of people in the community. The idea occurred, the state hospitals emptied, but there wasn't the money in the community. And I think that's where we're back to, trying to take care of people in the community.
Sure. Okay. That gives me a nice segue to Mr. Applebee. Wayne, why don't you tell us a little bit about what Sarasota County in particular funds, and then we may talk about what it doesn't fund. But sure. Give us a little rundown of those funding avenues and what they result in, please.
Yeah, well, certainly, following what's been discussed, the primary funding that the county provides in mental health is crisis-focused. So our biggest dollars are addressing the crisis of mental illness. Part of Florida statutes require that there be a 25% local match for different mental health services, including the crisis services. So we fund things such as the Crisis Stabilization Unit at Coastal in portion with the state for those crisis admissions of Baker Acts. We've also determined that when someone's in a Baker Act, it's really not effective use of our law enforcement resource to have them driving a Baker Act client around from facility to facility or from where their location. So we invest in funds with a medical transport company to do that for us. We also, though, beyond that, much beyond what is regulated by Florida statute, our county and I think the commissioners, in interest of promoting the wellness and the quality of life for our community, fund approximately $4.7 million in total in mental health services, and only about $1 million is actually mandated by the state. And so we do things such as also outpatient counseling for youth and families and adults with Jewish Family Children's Services as an example. One of the things that we're really proud of, and I think that we're targeting here well, there's never enough of it, is early intervention and prevention. We're trying to work early. And if you look at some of our funding with the Florida Center, and again, JFCS, or Jewish Family Children's Services, around counseling to try to address mental health issues early on.
The crisis stabilization units, how many are there that you pay for, that the county pays for? Well,
the way, again, the statute requires a combination of local match and state match. So the state funds 75%, the local match is 25%, the county meets that match. So it's a 30-bed facility. The county funds 6.5 beds of that. The state funds 17 beds. They are able to use third-party insurance when it's equitable for their billing allowance. So there's about another bed and a half day for that. So there's about 25, 26 beds that are actually funded of the 30. But historically, last year, 65% was the average utilization of those beds. In the past 3 years, we've only utilized 61% of the beds. So again, we have the capacity we need for the crisis stabilization unit for those that come in under law enforcement for the crisis services. But again, when you talk about the closure of mental health institutions and closures of G. Pierce Woods locally, if you go back and look at that historically, it wasn't a funding decision that drove that decision. It was ruled to be unconstitutional and violated individual civil rights. That was what the impetus was was for the closure. Now, funding certainly has been a question, moving those funds into community, but again, if we're only allowed to hold people against their will for treatment, we can only do that for a short period of time in a crisis situation, and we have plenty capacity for that. So, you know, my struggle is if we build more beds and we don't balance the rights of individuals and the ability to provide treatment to folks, we might struggle to fill those beds as well.
All right. Dr. Reid, you want to add something?
I'll wait.
Okay. All right. So we'll go back to that utilization issue in a minute. Although, Mary, is that your experience as well?
Well, we're jealous because our utilization is pretty close to 95%. There are many days. Melissa Larkin-Skinner, our chief clinical officer, is in the back of the audience. Wait, Melissa. And she is often called upon with her staff to move beds around to try and make room. So we have a different experience in Manatee. We have an overutilization of our beds.
Sure.
I might just also add, we're fortunate in Sarasota County as well, is that the commissioners have funded, really since about 2005, a 24/7 addictions receiving facility as well, which also provides 15 beds funded by the county for 24 admissions of Marchmanac, which is at a separate location, separate facility from the 30 that we have at Coastal. Many communities do not have that. In fact, most counties don't have that as an option. And so we are fortunate that there are resources here to address it. Again, the crisis only stays so long. It's intended to be temporary. The civil rights of individuals allow it to only be temporary. And I think many of the issues that we address or see in our community is what happens after that crisis.
Yeah, and we'll hit this point in a minute. Sheriff, give it just. I think everybody in this room probably knows, but just quickly, Baker Act, Marchman Act, the difference, and then talk a little bit about just the volume that your deputies experience in terms of Baker Act and Marchman Act cases.
And just to kind of frame it for everybody is, you know, the Sheriff's Office is the largest law enforcement agency in the county, but it's not the only one. And I know Sarasota Police, City of Venice, and Northport also deal with these issues. The Marchman Acts, last year alone, the Sheriff's Office served over 337 ex parte, which are court-ordered Marchman Acts. But I think the most important thing that we're talking about tonight would be the crisis of our mental health. And last year in 2015, the Sheriff's Office initiated over 1,051 Baker Acts. And so you can see the volume of what the deputies on the street are dealing with, and some of the training that they've got has helped them. But we have to remember those Baker Acts are people who are state of crisis. They're overtly indicating that they may harm themselves or others, or ingesting some type of drugs. And so we always talk about at the Sheriff's Office of the 1,051 that were Baker Acted by deputies alone, how many people are out there were also maybe have some mental health issues that were in some type of form of need, but we don't have the ability to help them on the street at 2 in the morning or when their family calls us because there's nothing to indicate that they would hurt themselves or hurt others. So it is a huge issue. We are increasing on that. The Marchman Acts last year the Sheriff's Office handled. And remember one thing about the Baker Acts, that's just for treatment. That's not for any continuity of care. That's just 72-hour treatment or released. The chronic that we deal with now will come back to us again. So of that 1,051, I'm certain that many of those are repeat individuals coming back in. And then the Marchman Acts, of course, and last year we initiated 333. Those would be, you know, again, crisis where people are overly intoxicated on some type of an opiate, the heroin, they're in ditches. The public has called for us to come and help, and we were able to Marchman Act them for their safety and security.
All right, so on the Baker Act, for example, which is the mental health issue,
I'm sorry, yes.
Imminent threat to yourself or somebody else, the deputy makes a determination. What happens?
Well, they get crisis and they get transported to the facility, the receiving facility. And in this case, Coastal Behavioral is the receiving facility for this community if they're adults, 17 and under, they go to Bayside, 65 and over, they go to Bayside, but they'll be transported to a receiving facility. In many cases, they go to Sarasota Memorial Hospital. And they are wonderful. We have a wonderful public hospital here. They're terrific. But again, we are just the crisis intervention, 72-hour treatment. And again, we may be dealing with them 3-4 days down the road as a repeat. And I think what we're probably hearing is that the continuity of care of these individuals is what we're seeing is what's lacking.
All right, so let's talk about that. So what, Dr. and Mary and Wayne, so what happens? Folks get there, they're there for 72 hours. Question one, what happens? Question two, what happens after 72 hours?
I guess the first thing I'd like to clarify is it's not true that everybody is just there for 72 hours, at least that comes to the hospital, because a lot of people come in with a medical problem, and they may be in a medical bed, but they're on a Baker Act. And so you all need to know that there's something called a medical hold, which means that if the person's being treated medically, the clock on the Baker Act does not run. So the person could be a week in the hospital being treated medically for diabetes or whatever else it is that's bothering them. And at the end of the time when the medical doctor says there's no more medical problem here, then the Baker Act starts the clock running, and then it's 72 hours from then. And then the person is usually transferred to a psychiatric facility at that point, unless for some reason other treatment has intervened or they've been decided to get rid of the Baker Act. What people then do, there's a couple of paths after that. One is if the person goes to a psychiatric facility and it's deemed by the doctors taking care of the person that there's still a problem that's going to require more than 72 hours, two doctors can then sign a piece of paper called a Baker Act 52 form that will then require a hearing with the judge, who will then sit and hear the hearing and decide whether or not the person should, in fact, have an extension of that original Baker Act for further treatment, or whether they need to be released. This is a part of the Baker Act that ensures that privacy and individuality gets protected, so that a person's, you can't get Uncle Joe signed away on a Baker Act and put away forever, right? And so then what happens is the person gets treated then further, and when in the best of cases, what happens is there's a plan for going outpatient, being treated outpatient. A lot of those programs, some of them, however, have gone away, unfortunately, because there were day programs and things like that that aren't supported by the government anymore. But in any case, there is a plan that's formulated to care for that person after. The other arm of that would be at the 72 hours, the person no longer meets the criteria for the Baker Act, they don't need further treatment, they can just be discharged. An attempt is made to formulate a plan for them. Of course, it has to be done in a much quicker fashion and may not be as complete.
All right, thanks. So Wayne, go ahead. Yeah, Wayne.
I just wanted to add a couple of points regarding some of our stats relative to Coastal and our crisis stabilization unit. So once they're brought there, we use 72 hours kind of loosely. It doesn't mean that everybody stays 72 hours. They really have to be, they're there for an examination. That's what that window of time is for a mental health examination. And if, in fact, that intimate threat is no longer there, they can't hold them even 72 hours. So the 72 hours is the max of the window, assuming that the examination can't be completed in that time, or the mental health results are that there needs to be further treatment. So we looked at the last fiscal year, what happened to all of the Baker Acts that came into our crisis stabilization unit here in Sarasota County. And again, it's the community mental health, meaning it's Coastal, it's the indigent provider. If you have third-party insurance or something, you may choose a different facility to be treated at. But in our admissions, 90% of the Baker Act admissions were in fact released back to the community, within that 72-hour window, with some type of discharge plan, but they were released back to the community for community-based care. 9% either voluntarily or through the court process that Dr. Reid just described, through a court process were held longer for either further examination or treatment, and then 1% was actually determined to be eligible for state hospital. It doesn't mean they immediately went to state hospital because you have to wait for those beds to open up. So that's really kind of the flavor of our crisis stabilization unit on what happens after the sheriff's office brings them there.
So I'd like to be the provocateur on that one.
Okay, and we got another one coming after you, so.
Because what really happens is people benefit from the medical services they receive at Coastal or Sarasota Memorial or Centerstone. They're feeling better because we do have many more advanced medical options than we did from the 60s. And that's part of the heartbreak of people not getting care. We actually have it to offer, and we know it works. So what really happens after discharge is the benefit of that medical stabilization starts to get lost for those people who don't have a place to live. Because if you don't know where you're next going to go to the bathroom, get a drink of water, or have a meal, or put your head to rest, you're going to get sicker again. So housing is a huge gap. We all offer, all facilities in this community offer an appointment, a follow-up appointment within our system of care. Most people don't make it because they're not capable, they don't have transportation, they didn't understand, they lost interest or hope, who knows what the reasons are, and so—
The appointment's too far out.
The apartment's too far out. And so what we know is that something is needed to help carry people from one level of care to the next. And that's why we see crisis after crisis stabilization.
Okay, so we'll come back to the how would you fix that if you could. But now we're going to ask Carrie to talk a little bit about, this is anecdotal of course, but your experience in terms of what happens after that 72 hours.
Yeah, I just want to say, even in a best case scenario where you have a family involved and very concerned, and my experience with the Baker Act and the Crisis Stabilization Unit with my son was about 5 years ago. So I know there's been a lot of transition at Coastal since then in management, and I know a lot of things have changed. So this isn't in any way to condemn anyone. But my experience was my son was Baker Acted. He was held for 72 hours. He was put on an old school medication called Thorazine that he'd never been on before. He was clearly not stable after 72 hours, to my mind. I met with the medical team, which Dr. Reid mentioned that 2 doctors have to give approval for him to be kept longer. I remember very well the scene where I sat in the room with them sobbing and begging them to keep him. And they did not choose to keep him. They let him out on the medication. He was given a follow-up appointment. But within the week between when he was released and his follow-up appointment, he walked away from the residential facility where he was living, and he was lost for a week. I had no idea where he was. And when he did walk away, there was no help for me from the facility that he walked from I filed a missing persons report, but that was basically as far as it went in terms of law enforcement. You know, the only reason I got him back was because I took out a display ad in the newspaper that I paid for with his picture in it saying, "Have you seen this young man?" And thank God somebody called, one person called. So I'm just saying that even in the best case scenario where you do have a family who's following up and you do have, you know, transportation and funds and everything else, it doesn't work. There isn't, I mean, Mary's right, there isn't enough oversight to make sure that that follow-up plan or treatment plan or whatever it is actually takes place.
So how could we change this, Mary, this kind of thing where you said you go from crisis to stabilization to you're out on your own, maybe you come, maybe you don't. you have thoughts on how we can improve that. And
I
also,
got a whole plan.
Yeah, and also, let's also talk a little bit about the HIPAA laws, the privacy laws, and whether it would make sense to make some changes in those to give more access to information in families.
Well, I think that the plan that would work for families the best is for the crisis stabilization to continue after they're out of the inpatient setting. And that has to be very intensive. That has to be daily. That has to be someone you can call 24/7 who will help you, that will provide the things that might be missing in the equation. Maybe there's no insurance, so you can't afford the medication, or whatever the situation is, and look for the things that that individual would like to achieve for themselves, because you can't live based on involuntary treatment. You have to fight for your own goals and the own things that you want in your life. And we find if we can identify what those things are for a person and support those hopes and dreams, that they want to find out how they can fulfill them. And then we have somebody who's working with us and taking the lead in their own care. And so this idea of a hospital without walls that and you can call it a crisis medical home. You can call it fact light. Some people call it fact light. But the idea is that someone is there with you 24/7 until the crisis truly is over and the person truly can benefit from the next level of care. Because there's a difference between not needing inpatient anymore and being ready for the next step. And I think that's the missing link. We provided that service for 3 years and have evaluation data that shows 89% of the people that we served in this crisis medical home were able to benefit from outpatient only. Very few needed to go to FACT, very few needed to go to state hospital, nobody went to jail. So we really believe in it because you're describing what you needed and what you didn't have, and we concur with you. We have to support your loved one and the family in continuing that stabilization process.
Now, does that still occur?
It does. Of course, our funding was cut, so we can't serve as many people. We are asking the legislature to refund it. Again, we're going to go fight for the money. We don't give up. And we're also promoting this as a statewide model. We feel that Florida should adopt this as a policy initiative. I should also mention that our sheriff and Judge Quartermain, Major Bell, many others, Wayne is also working on this. We're looking at trying to offer a service, a crisis service similar to this, to divert people from the jail. Because the largest psychiatric hospital at this table is not Sarasota Memorial or Centerstone. It's the sheriff's jail.
It's true.
And we have to change that. So there is a collaboration working on that. We're calling it Comprehensive Treatment Court, and we're looking for the funding to make it a reality.
All right. So let's go ahead.
Can I just ask, did your son have a diagnosis early with that story?
That incident actually took place about 2 years after he was diagnosed.
Okay. Did it take long for him to get a diagnosis? That was my question.
He had a diagnosis fairly early on, and while he continued to live with me, things were stabilized to some degree. The medications were, he had a lot of problems with side effects and so forth, but as when we were still, he was still living at my home, things were doing okay, and we were living in New Mexico, which also has a very low level of services, and he was actually integrated back into the community. He had a job. I lost my job there because the newspaper I worked for shut down. I took the job here in Sarasota. He didn't want to come with me, and that's when all that's when all the prices kicked up again. So.
All right. So let's go back to the program, to the jail diversion program. I should note that Judge Erica Quartermain is here. Thank you for being here. So, Sheriff, tell us a little bit about the kind of the profile of people in jail in terms of impacts on mental health, And then 2, tell us about what you're working on with, and I will say with the judge, the public defender, state attorney?
Predominantly Judge, everybody, yes, and Judge Quartermain, thank you. And you know, I've been sheriff now 7 years, and we've been through our opiates, we've been through a little bit of everything, and we're the only jail in the Southeast United States that has addiction recovery programs, and that's not what people typically see of a county jail or what they would think of our jail, but we look for opportunities. We don't want people coming back, and so we're doing some really cool stuff. And one of the things we're doing now, of course, is looking at the people who have mental health issues. And to give you some numbers, the jail right now downtown holds on average 900 to 1,000 people at any given time, which is a lot more than what people would think. A third of those people in the jail have self-reported mental health issues. So you're talking 300 people in the jail have self-reported. Half of those individuals at the jail, which would be about 150, voluntarily accept medications for their issues that they have right now. And so that's a big number. And you heard it earlier, we are the largest facility for people with mental health issues, and we're trying to keep people from coming to that jail.
Sheriff, when you say self-report, what do you mean?
Is that, again, like you were talking about, Tom, with HIPAA and people's rights, we can't force them to talk to us about their medical background.
But they just tell you when
but they tell. We have a
like
screening process, and
okay.
when they come into booking, they will self-report that they have some mental health issues and the medications in our medical contract there. And just to kind of give you an overview, we have a $1.4 million annual medical contract with a private provider, and half of the medical care that this provider provides inside that jail is for mental health. And so you can see the size and magnitude of what we're dealing with right now. And I might let Mary hit on that. You know, one of the things that we're always looking at is with our addiction recovery, we've had great successes with it. It's not perfect, but we're certainly seeing successes with people who are getting their life straight and getting back going again. We're really proud of that. So my jail commander, Major Bell's here, so he was looking at, you know, how can we apply this as it comes to mental health? And the biggest thing is continuity of care, that when we release them from the jail facility, just like anywhere else they're released from, they're going right back to the same program. Mary was saying they're going back to where they came from. They don't have anybody there to give them that continuity of care. And so we're looking right now with having a discharge planner hired and coming in within the facility and working with a Cornerstone on trying the best we can do to give them the continuity of care so that they don't go back out in the street and get involved in the same situation that they were involved with before and come back inside the jail and go through the whole process again. So I think everything you're hearing here tonight is that gap in the middle of how do we get these individuals who need help, that long-term help, so they can become self-sustained. And certainly law enforcement is not designed for that, but we're real proud of where we're at with the Sheriff's Office trying to be part of the solution.
Okay, so it's my understanding you kind of have 2 initiatives, which are actually kind of newsy.
Yeah.
One is a memo of understanding.
Memorandum of understanding.
Yeah.
Everything's got to be legal.
Classic bureaucrat.
Yeah.
And between the courts, the county courts, state attorney, public defender, your office,
right,
and somebody else.
Cornerstone.
Centerstone.
I said that every day, Jeff, yesterday.
Yeah.
He kept telling me don't say that. Centerstone. I keep thinking Manatee Glens. I'm sorry, so I'm getting to it. So
the way that would work is people who are encountered in the court system, essentially you'd be creating something like a mental health court.
Yeah.
Fair enough?
Something
like, yeah.
It's kind of like drug court,
journalism terms,
all these
good
different
enough.
things.
Legal terms, perhaps not. But something like that. So Sarasota County is in the process of creating some sort of a system for ensuring or enabling people who are charged with minor crimes to get mental health treatment. So that's a new thing.
Continuing care, yes, and we're about ready to kick off on that, and we're excited. So we're excited to get the continuity of care and see how it works.
And you're waiting on what?
Money.
How much? How much money are we talking about?
We're working on the budget now, but it's about $900,000.
Okay, so if there's anybody in this room.
I just want to add that in Miami-Dade County, a judge there just received a big award from the Supreme Court for dealing with mental health issues. And in that county last year, there were 48,000 arrests that attributed to 48,000 calls to police for mental health issues. Out of those 48,000 calls, there were only 109 arrests. So that program seems to be working pretty well.
Right.
And the number of people that went to jail were very much decreased to the point where they could actually close one of the jails in the county. So those programs appear to be pretty successful.
All right, good. So you're talking about something along those lines, Sheriff. So what kind of crimes, what kind of people would be eligible for this?
Well, of course, the courts would be the one designed, but the type of crimes are quality of life. You know, I think, you know, it's going to go back a lot to the homeless that are being brought in. And so they're quality of life crimes and low-end offenders, as we call them. You know, most of our jail population is low-end offenders. Most of them are there for mental health issues or drug addiction issues and some type of addiction. And so we are a county that is well-suited for a program like this. And if the funding comes through, I think we'll see great results like they did in Miami-Dade. If Miami-Dade County can pull it off, I think we'll do it even better here.
And just the editorial comment is, don't count on Medicaid expansion.
No.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You can storm the gates, and it's not going to happen, unfortunately. So tell us about the other thing you're doing. You're changing the way you provide services in the jail, health services, correct?
With the health service, yes, and it's kind of amazing. We have a private contract and with healthcare, and they're terrific, and they have taken upon themselves that they will work with Centerstone and make sure that they provide what is needed from their end to Centerstone. And Mary, correct me if I'm wrong, you've been doing this in Manatee County with the same provider contract that we have selected down here to do this. And do you have any information, maybe some numbers or stats or anecdotal of how it's worked up there?
It's worked really wonderfully because we have information about the folks who have been in treatment. We can continue the medications that they're on because we have that information. And then we can also help them get back to the level of care that they left before they were incarcerated. So it weaves that population back into the treatment continuity again. And so that's the real strength of it. And of course, we get to know the people. They trust us.
Get a relationship.
We have a relationship. They know that we're looking out for their best interest, and so we're able to help them. We're also able to take calls from the families. I think my loved one is in jail. Well, we can go look for them and try to engage them. And maybe they didn't disclose before, but the thing about HIPAA is we're limited in what we can tell you, but you can tell us everything, and you know that we can act on it.
So speaking of that, well, actually, let's back up. So kind of give us an idea of literally how that works. You have somebody who goes to the jail and talks to inmates, or how does it work literally? We have
a psychiatrist who is regularly scheduled there. In Manatee, it's about 30 hours. I think it's 20 in the Sarasota jail. We have 2 social workers who are there 7 days a week, and so they are basically living at the jail. The booking nurses are identifying people who report a history, and we immediately start working with what their needs are, both while they're in the jail and when they leave the jail. Many times on first appearances, we can go to the judge and recommend that they be released to us, that we have a plan for them and they're willing, and if the offense meets the judge's criteria, then we can effectuate that plan. We had a program in Manatee which went away, which we all loved. It was called supervised release. Basically, we served in place of the probation officer. And that was a very effective program. So that's how it works. We work with the medical personnel and immediately start working on a plan. We support their counseling needs. The doctor supports their psychiatric needs, and we make sure that they go back on the medications that work for them both when they enter the jail and when they leave it.
Okay, Dr. Reid?
Yeah, I don't want to get into a controversy about city, county, about different, shelters versus, homes and all of that. But there's a shelter, it's called a safety shelter in Fort Myers, that several of us have been to see. And I was impressed by the fact of two things. One, it was a portal where people, instead of going to jail, went, in fact, into the shelter. There was a vacant lot between where the shelter was and the county mental health building. And so patients who needed, or people who had mental health issues and needed medicine or evaluation, got sent across the lot and then brought back to the shelter. The interesting thing about this shelter is not a come-as-you-are shelter. This shelter, you could only get in it 3 ways. You could either be diverted there by the police, who gave the person a choice to go to jail or go to the shelter, and they knew up front that they would have to do something if they went to this shelter, and means be proactive. Secondly, the hospital there, Lee Memorial, could send a patient there. And then thirdly, the VA had the ability to send people there. When the person got to this shelter, they had to be evaluated by a nurse, a couple of nurses, and have all their medical things evaluated, their mental health aspect evaluated, and it was then for that 3 days that they decided what they were going to do for the time that they were going to remain in that shelter. The interesting thing was the people there were very embarrassed about their outcomes. Their average length of stay was 3 weeks, and their outcomes were that they said, in an embarrassed sort of way, well, only 50% of the people at the end of the 3 weeks don't go back to the street. Like it should somehow be more. I thought that was a wonderful result, actually, and they've been doing that for 5 years. And so, from my standpoint, it would be nice to have a portal that we could have diversion to, and then on the other end of that, we still need housing, as Mary points out, because it doesn't matter. When you leave the shelter, you got to go somewhere, and it has to be somewhere where you can get support. So I just thought that was interesting.
Good. Mary, you mentioned the HIPAA laws, the medical privacy laws. As a professional, do you think we need to change those laws somewhat to make it easier for families to gain information?
Congressman Murphy from Pennsylvania has a reform bill filed in the Congress that addresses the concerns of family members who are concerned, where is my loved one? What medications are they on? Because I would like to be sure they get the right pills. I'm the one who takes responsibility for this. So I think that there's a lot of controversy about that bill, but Congressman Murphy very much has heard the concerns of families and is trying to address it. I guess my attitude is what we're doing is not working so great. Maybe we should try something a little different. I also think that we providers kind of make it worse because we take the HIPAA law so literally. Well, I can't tell you anything because it's HIPAA, but I can tell you that I will take the information that you entrust with me and do the right thing. I may not be able to tell you what happened, but at least you know somebody's taking care of it. And I think many times healthcare providers just use HIPAA as the end of the conversation, the end of the work. It doesn't have to be. Nothing about HIPAA says that we can't listen to you. And so I say this to you so that you insist that they do listen to you and that they do commit to doing what they feel is appropriate with the information that you have.
I agree 1,000%. The doctor may not be able to tell you much, but they should be able to listen to everything you have to say. And I will tell you that a large percentage of the time, it's very important what the family member has to say. So the doctor needs to listen to that, and they can, and there's no law against it. I agree.
And many times, I can't give specific information, but I can tell the family member, in cases like this is what usually happens, to offer reassurance and information. So I think we make it more rigid than it needs to be, but Congressman Murphy is proposing an experiment to see if we change some things, whether that will improve things. So we'll have to see. It is an experiment.
Yeah, it's kind of like when you go to the doctor's office and they say they're protecting your information, then the nurse comes out and opens it up. Mr. Tryon, your appointment here. I mean, geez, thanks, here I am. Yeah, everybody. You agree? We need to make some changes in those laws, or at least in the interpretation thereof?
I was very fortunate in that my son agreed to give me access to his doctors, so and that is not at all common. However, I would just second what Mary said about families serving as advocates by providing as much information as possible. I was not encouraged to do that originally, and I didn't really know originally that I had the right to do that. And, you know, once I found out, I'm sure that my son's doctors didn't really appreciate it, because I was like, would you like to read his diary? You know, I mean, I knew a lot, and I wanted to share it with them. And so I would just say to any family member in that situation, you have the right to share everything you know with them, and even to express what you feel would be the appropriate approach for medication or for treatment. I don't feel like any of my son's psychiatrists ever knew as much as I did about how my son was reacting to the medications he was on, because I was with him all the time, and I knew him better than they did. So nobody knows better than you, and if your child is not going to give permission for you to speak with your doctors, you can still speak to them. Or in some cases, I even submitted, you know, documentation.
What we encourage people to do is keep a list of the medications they've ever been on and what their reactions were to it, favorable, unfavorable, and give it to the facility. Because the doctor wants to know. He doesn't want to try the same medication that had a bad reaction before, and your loved one may not be a good historian while they're sick.
Yeah, Wayne, we had talked a little bit about kind of the public policy and the legal questions when you mentioned that the crisis stabilization unit beds with a 61% utilization rate, and just about this recycling of people who are released and then go back out on the street and back later, or back in the jail. Any thoughts you wanted to share in terms of from where you sit when you watch the money go out, and how a local government can use money effectively?
Well, you know, I don't really disagree with anything that the folks here had to say, and it's very fortunate, I think, for Carrie that her son let her in on the medical information. I think there are so many people that don't have that option, and their loved ones have been, you know, are not allowed that information, or the family has given up on the individual and the system, and there's nobody there to advocate for them, and that's really tragic, because we know it's difficult to navigate. As far as you know, the HIPAA and the laws, I'm also very interested in you know, watching the Congressman Murphy's bill, and agree with Mary that, you know, it's not working well for us now. It's probably why tonight's event was sold out, right? It's not working well for us. We have to be careful, of course, about not eroding everybody's civil rights, but there probably needs to be a different balance than there is today, and policymakers, you know, at the federal and state level need to probably look at that, you know?
Yeah, good. So let's shift gears just a little bit. You know, so I think, not to try to sugarcoat things, but, you know, there's a couple encouraging things. The mental health, the journalist slang mental health court development, some changes in the provision of mental health services to the inmates. And Carrie, you wrote a nice long story this week about a positive development in our community. So why don't you share that, please?
Yeah, we're so fortunate, and we have representatives from this organization here in the audience today. We have a new facility that hopefully will be open by the end of this year, that is being underwritten by Bob and Joan Geyer of Sunset Automotive. It's based on a model called Vincent House, which is up in Pinellas Park, and it is a recovery through work program for people who are recovering from severe mental illnesses. And although my son was not a benefactor of that program because we just felt it was too far for him to travel back and forth, he did get supported employment through another organization. And I can tell you that employment has just been so critical to his recovery in terms of everything from his activity level to his self-esteem. It's just, to me, I think, a very important and integral part. I mean, they have to be at a certain level before they can take advantage of it. And the Vincent Academy that'll be happening here, it's a place where they have to earn their recovery. It's not just handed to them. But I think it's a wonderful model that they are funding through a really creative partnership of both public and private funding, which I think, you know, obviously with the funding challenges that we have on mental health, we're going to have to get creative about funding. And so I think it's a really wonderful model, and we're so lucky to have it coming here.
Yeah, and that speaks to, I think, what we talked about earlier, just the different levels. When we talk about mental health, you can't lump it all in one big bag and say that everybody's in crisis, because that's not the case.
But I will say one thing. I mean, we're talking a lot about the continuum of care that needs to happen after someone is in crisis, and I do think that's very critical for us to deal with because of the system that we have right now. You know, ultimately, if I'm waving my magic wand and we're talking about long term, what we really need in this country is a whole different approach to mental health, where we're all concerned, as concerned about mental health from childhood as we are about any other illness. So that, I mean, when I look back now, there were probably indications long before I was aware of anything that my son had some issues. And had his doctors, you know, approached that, had I been more educated, had we just had a different mentality about caring for your mental health throughout life. And as I think Wayne said, that your brain is an organ like any other organ in your body. I think once we have that, we're going to have a lot less problems on the deep end that we're in right now.
The onset of schizophrenia is 3 years on the average after symptoms appear. The diagnosis of schizophrenia is made 3 years after the onset of symptoms. It's a long time.
Yeah. So, Mary and Dr. Reid, why this all makes sense? Everybody's nodding their head. Yes, we should have early intervention and prevention, but we don't. Why don't we?
I think Carrie said it best. It's because we don't treat it like a medical issue. Other good news, the Department of Health has suggested that school nurses drop screening for scoliosis because it's not very common, and introduce screening for behavioral health risks. So if we were able to identify risk very early on, we could follow, we could assess, we could intervene early, we could treat when it's not very serious, we can educate the family and the patient, and they never have to go to crisis. Crisis, I feel a great sense of urgency about avoiding, because we know every psychotic break doesn't leave the brain in as good a health. We lose something every time. And so avoiding that crisis, there is work going on across the nation now about prodromal before psychotic break to even prevent schizophrenia. It's very experimental, but I think because we don't treat it like preventing cavities, you know, where you learn, remember how you had to chew those red pills and brush your teeth? You know, we could be doing the same thing in schools for mental health and addictions issues, and getting people into early intervention, and they may never then progress to more serious stages.
There's also a program, Mary, you've probably heard of it, called Ruiz, that the National Institute for Health has tested in about 30-some communities around. I think the only one in Florida maybe is in Fort Lauderdale. but it stands for Recovery After Initial Schizophrenic Episode. And so that's a situation when someone does have their first psychotic break. There's a whole system in place of a broad-based care and continuum of treatment for them after that initial episode to try to prevent the repeat episodes.
All right, so I had made my editorial comment about doubting that Medicaid reform would be coming, and so the question starts to center on, okay, how can we pay for some of this? Back in November, Jim Lay, the Sarasota County Administrator from 1997 to 2011, man, that was a long time, wrote a guest column in the Herald-Tribune opinion pages, and in that column he proposed that the county commission ask the voters to create a county health and mental health care special district, which is authorized under state law. That would allow the county commission to levy a small property tax for funding mental health care services in the county. Who thinks that's a good idea? Okay, thank you. Anybody up here want to volunteer? Sheriff running for re-election?
Well, since I'm not running for
Thank you,
re-election,
Tom. You know, I think we're always looking at money and budgets, and I don't control the money in this county, but a lot of it would be the fact that, we applied for what's called a MacArthur grant, and we wanted to look at the total package of what's coming into our jail and out of our jail, and just the whole, how the whole system works. And I certainly know these commissioners, and this county has the lowest millage rate, and there's still a lot of money coming into it, and it's got a $1.2 billion budget. And like Wayne said, I don't think they're afraid to fund. They just want to make sure the outcomes are going to be there. And so before we in government, in the bureaucracies, it's easy to throw money at something without knowing for certain that the money's going to be spent where it needs to be spent and how it needs to be spent for the outcomes. And so I would certainly like to see something that we didn't get this MacArthur grant. We wish we would have. It went to Palm Beach County, Cook County, Illinois, which is Chicago, and New York City for large jails, larger jails than we have here. But certainly we want to look at our entire systems, how much redundancies are in the systems, how many people are after the money, where the money's going, where the outcomes are at, before you just talk about taxing people and throwing the money at it and giving people the money. So I think that the whole, in this county, I can assure you of this, Tom, in this county, if there's some way to do that, and we've seen the difficulties with that here in the last couple of years, am I right? You get a lot of pushback. And so, but certainly the system and how many different organizations are providing the same type of care and how much money is being provided to them and the outcomes need to be looked at before you talk about taxing and putting money into a system that may be broken.
All right, Mary, not running for re-election.
not running for re-election. Here's what we're up against. In the recession, nationwide, at local, state, and federal levels, we cut $4 billion, that's with a B, out of mental health care nationwide. We have never put it back. Florida is 49th out of 50 states in per capita funding. Revenues in this state are at $1 billion more than last year, and the governor is proposing $19 million to be increased in mental health. We would have to have a $450 million increase to be below average. So the gap is so huge. The numbers of people going without care that aren't touched by the sheriff, aren't touched by the services, that the families are struggling with alone is tremendous. We are not going to see Medicaid expansion. The federal government passed a law called Excellence in Mental Health, which offered additional funding for quality. Florida did not apply. And so I think the cavalry is not coming over the hill. Obama offered $500 million for additional mental health services, but he paired it with me having to report about mental health conditions. How much of that is going to go for treatment? And of course, $500 million nationwide is nothing. So the gap is very, very large. The deficit is very, very huge. We can't count on the federal government or the state government. And so if we want a solution for the people who are here, I think we have to look to a local solution. And I do agree, we need more than one answer. We need to apply for all of these grants. We need to look for new services that are more effective. We need to partner together. And I think one of the things that's truly extraordinary about Sarasota County is the collaboration is unprecedented. You have accomplished things here, private-public partnership, the Marchman, the detox, that very few communities can really claim, and that is a credit to the collaboration of this community. But at a certain point, working together isn't going to be enough if there's not money for the medication or the housing or the things that aren't health care. Even if you had Medicaid expansion, these things wouldn't get paid for. So I think we need a serious and continuing form of dedicated funding for mental health care, not only in Sarasota County, but nationwide. And I don't think we can take anything off the table because the gap is so huge.
I certainly agree. I must say the Herald-Tribune's article today was very good and suggested that Mental Health Association of Central Florida you could go to their website and vote to send a message to the State House Speaker.
For those of you like me who are just like little peons who are not running for office and have no great amount of power, and even though Tom says it'll never happen, the Mental Health Association of Central Florida is just kicked off a write-in campaign to write to legislators or to the Speaker of the House, urging them both for Medicaid expansion, but also for expanded mental health funding. And if you're feeling like helpless and you don't know how you can help in the fight, go to their website, which is mhacf.org, or you can just into Google put Elect Health Florida, Elect Health FL. And that's the name of the campaign. It's all over social media. And you go right to their homepage. There's a button right there that says Elect Health Florida. You click the button, you put in your name and your zip code, and they add your name to the list sent to lawmakers. So the least we can do is let them know, let them squirm that there's a whole lot of us out here that want them to do something.
Yeah, yeah. And just for the record, the Herald-Tribune, our editorial board, has not given up. We won't quit, but we're just pessimistic, realistic. So it's that magical time when you get to pull out your wand and say, if you could change one thing, do one thing, what would it be? And we'll start with the sheriff.
Oh, man.
On this topic. No, yeah.
I think everybody knows I don't have the answer, but it bothers me to go in my jail, and I don't go in there a whole lot because it bothers me. So having that middle ground that Mary was talking about, somewhere where we can take people when they get discharged or have our discharge planner and take them for continuing care, and the continuum is important to us. So that would be the one biggest thing that we would like to see start up, and we feel like we're getting there, but again, we need the money to do that.
And when you first became sheriff, I bet you didn't think you'd say that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And well, I didn't think we'd have addiction recovery in a jail either, but the whole idea is to help people, and we're at the sheriff's office here is that, we want to help people, and we get more rewards at this point of our careers of helping people. It's easy to arrest people. We get more rewards now after 29 years of trying to help people get them back up on their feet and running. And if anybody wants to tour that jail, just shoot me an email or call me, and I think you'll be amazed at what you see inside of there, but some of the things we're doing. So, but if we get that middle ground of care, like Mary's saying, we're excited about where we're at. We're hoping we can make a difference.
Great, thank you, sir. Wayne?
Well, you know, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, and this panel said before, is I think if I could fix one thing, it would be the stigma of mental illness, because I think that, you know, that's a societal thing, and it will probably take a long time, but that will affect all the policy decisions that we make thereunder. That could affect the difference between making us a crisis system versus, you know, a health system that we're looking at early on. So that would be the one thing. And can I just ask, is this the closing statement, or can I offer something else?
You can offer something.
Well, I just know that, you know, this is probably recorded and people may stream, and this is a very sensitive topic for some folks who are living in this world, and their family members are living in this world. And I just wanted to let folks know who may not have yet begun the journey that Carrie did, that there are resources out there. That in fact, it doesn't take a professional such as Dr. Reid or the sheriff from law enforcement to ask for a Baker Act examination. Family members, concerned neighbors can actually ask the court for that. And 2% of all Baker Acts in the state of Florida are done by a family member asking the court to have their loved one looked at and examined. And so people don't often know that.
And you can do the same for the Marchman Act.
And you can do the same for the Marchman Act. The other thing is, I think that, you know, folks like Carrie and other family members, you know, they carry this illness, you know, at least equally, if not greater, than the person who does it in their family, their loved one, because they're always in pain watching what their family member's going through. And so if there are people that are there, know that there are support groups. National Alliance on Mental Illness, NAMI, it's a national organization. We have an affiliate here in Sarasota County, and it helps with parent support groups and helping folks navigate the system. And so I just wouldn't want to leave this conversation without saying some of that information.
And how do you do that? Who do you call?
Well, that's a good question. NAMI, do you have NAMIs?
NAMI, there's probably a NAMI representative
I'll tell
here.
you,
I know several
real quick,
contacted me and said they were coming.
Just raise your hand.
And
Got a bunch of them here.
yeah,
Okay.
and it's very easy. If you just go online and Google NAMI Sarasota, you'll get the information.
Okay, thanks. There's a card there. But in terms of asking for a Baker Act or Marchman Act examination, who does a family member call?
You go down to the clerk of the court and file at the court. There's a form. You just tell them why you're there, and they'll help you fill it out.
And actually, I did Baker Act my son, so that was how he got Baker Act.
All right, Mary, it's the one.
Well, I would want a cure. That's what I would want. But if I could,
all the rest of it.
if I couldn't have a cure, then what I would want is that mental health would just be a normal part of everybody's daily life. It'd be part of health and wellness. No one would feel ashamed for taking care of their mental health, and it would just be an expected part of a full life.
Good. Dr. Reid?
Good. So Mary's giving a very good description of the absence of stigma, which is my vote as well. That's my magic wand. And some of you in the audience here I know have been to the celebrity talks we've had, you know, in the Eiserman Foundation once a year with celebrities who've come with their own mental health issues. You know, we've had Carrie Fisher, Princess Leia, and Richard Dreyfuss, and this year we had Dan Rather, who doesn't have, the only person we've had who didn't have mental illness but had a good take on mental health issues. And the absence of stigma is where it's at, I agree. We have to have this, have the same parity of help and care as any other medical problem.
Good.
I had one.
You may add one.
So I know I already waved my magic wand a couple times, but one more time. I do get a lot of mail and questions from people who are, you know, concerned citizens who say, what can I do? You know, I want to help, what can I do? What you can do is keep this issue at the forefront, talk about it, don't help remove the stigma, talk about people you know who are in recovery. Keep the issue alive and advocate as much as you can on a personal level, whether it's talking to your neighbor and sharing a story of someone in your family or supporting someone whose family is going through someone in crisis. Just keep it at the forefront, don't hide it.
Great.
Tom?
Yes.
A card was handed to me with the NAMI contact information, so I just wanted to share it. You can reach them at email at namisrq@gmail.com, so that's NAMISRQ@gmail.com, or of course 941-376-9361.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you everybody who has attended, who's been attentive. We appreciate you being here very much. Again, this will air on METV and on the METV YouTube channel. You can post comments and ask questions. Carrie and I will try to get you answers to questions that you post. It may take a while, but we'll try. And of course, coverage in tomorrow's Herald-Tribune. And I've always wanted to say this. In the words of Dr. Fraser Crane, wishing you good night and wishing you all good mental health.